Some killers enjoy the scream. Some enjoy the silence after. But the worst kind, they enjoy the wait. The hour before, when you don't know you're dying yet, when your hands still trust the doorknob, and your eyes still see the world as safe. That's the hour they study. That's the hour they own. And across America, in gas stations, shipping yards, drainage fields, and apartment elevators, 5 of them thrived. They didn't just kill, they mutilated logic. They reshaped innocence into instruments of suffering, and their stories don't end with arrest, because even now they linger, not in the world, but in you, in the part of you that locks the bathroom door without knowing why. It began in 1997 in Shreveport, Louisiana, where heat drips from the air like oil and everything smells faintly like rust. That summer, police responded to what they thought was a home invasion in a dead-end street near the rail yards. What they found inside the trailer wasn't robbery. It wasn't even murder in the conventional sense. The victim, a man in his late 40s, named Ellis Drew, a retired freight worker, was found in his bathtub, not stabbed, not shot, but erased, stripped. Limbs folded unnaturally, face removed with such precision that one officer threw up before the camera even flashed. There were no signs of struggle, no forced entry, just a note written on the mirror in what turned out to be the victim's own blood that read, "I had to clean him. He was rotten inside." That note would echo. Over the next 9 months, 4 more bodies appeared, all men, all older, all former railroad employees, each one found in their home, each one washed, posed, and flayed in different ways, one with no lips, one with his tongue threaded through his own fingers, one with every rib broken but the skin left untouched. And every time, the same note appeared. Always the mirror, always. "I had to clean him." The press dubbed the killer the groomer, assuming some sexually motivated pathology. But they were wrong. Because in late 1998, a woman named Callie Monroe came forward. She was the ex-wife of a man who worked alongside the first 3 victims. And she had a story. She claimed that back in 1995, her husband, Derek Monroe, had come home from a job hauling freight through Georgia. Shaken, twitchy, different. He stopped sleeping. He'd locked the bathroom door and whispered to himself in the shower. Then, one night, he confessed something that chilled her. That he and 3 others had accidentally hit a transient boy while speeding a rail car for fun, and left him to die in the mud. "Nobody will find him," he'd said. "We buried the mess in iron." She thought he was drunk, but now those men were dead. And whoever had written on the mirrors, they hadn't just found the killers, they'd ritualized them, turned revenge into anatomy. Police traced the murder scenes. No prints, no hair, no DNA. But what they did find was something stranger. Old train schedules, oil-stained gloves, and in one case, an entire rail spike embedded in the wall beside the bed. It wasn't there before. It was placed. On purpose. As if the killer wasn't hiding their signature, they were writing it in code. A retired conductor helped decode the locations, each one aligned with a forgotten freight stop, each address circling closer to an old decommissioned train tunnel 5 miles east of town. When the FBI raided the tunnel, they found what looked like a shrine. Railroad ties arranged like ribs, a small pile of charred fabric, and in the center, embedded in the dirt, a rusted nameplate partially melted from an old uniform. The name? Malcolm J. Thorne. A 17-year-old boy reported missing in 1995 and never found. The groomer was never caught. No fingerprints, no sightings. But the killings stopped. Just like that. And to this day, any retired rail worker in that region refuses to talk about 1995. Some say Malcolm's body was never recovered because it was welded inside a freight wall. Others say the groomer isn't dead, just waiting for the next circle to close. Because revenge this precise doesn't fade. It studies, it hibernates. And when it wakes again, it doesn't knock. The groomer never left a footprint, not on carpet, not in memory. That was the horror. You could stand in a room where he had peeled a man's scalp into flower petals and still feel nothing but stillness. Like the violence had vacuumed the air clean. Investigators kept returning to the same question. How did he get in? How did he know their schedules, their weaknesses, the exact moment they'd be alone? The answer wasn't in the houses. It was in the rail system itself. He wasn't following them from outside. He was already inside. One officer, who later left the force due to persistent auditory trauma, described the realization this way. He didn't find these men by accident. He found them by timetables. He wasn't following humans. He was following steel. What they found in the abandoned tunnel outside Shreveport confirmed this. It wasn't just a hideout. It was a mind. Notes written on rail tickets, ink bleeding through years of damp, sketches of bodies, not artistic but functional, arrows, angles, muscles labeled like tools. One diagram showed the human spine with pressure points circled in red. Another featured a skull, split along surgical seams with the word "rattled" written over and over again in the margins. Beside a pile of worn gloves was a wooden crate filled with old VHS tapes, all blank, all scrawled with names of dead men. Not the victims. The crew members from the 1995 Rail Manifest. There were 11 total. 5 were dead, 6 were alive. All 6 were put under protection. 2 fled the country. 1 shot himself. Another attempted suicide and failed. The remaining 2 refused to speak. They signed sealed affidavits, handed to the FBI, and then vanished into relocation programs. No charges were ever filed. The psychology unit spent months building a profile of the groomer. The name stuck, even though grooming was the wrong word. There was no evidence of sexual ritual. The cleaning had more in common with mortuary preparation. He shaved them, clipped nails, washed hair, dressed them in new undershirts, and then he took them apart, not in frenzy, but in order. Every joint bent backward, every wound precise. This was not a man who killed out of anger. This was funeral revenge, a perverse form of respect given only after dismantling the body of the guilty. One profiler said, "He's not punishing them. He's helping them transition. In his mind, he's the last person on earth who sees them clearly." And maybe he was. But there was one detail that never made the case files public. One fact buried so deep it only came out years later in an off-record conversation between 2 retired field agents. The groomer had help. Not an accomplice. Not someone who committed the murders. But someone who gave him names, a list, a whisper pipeline from the inside. Because the 1995 crew, those records weren't digital. They weren't public. They were handwritten dispatch sheets stored in a backroom office of a defunct railway company, accessed only once in the past 20 years, by a clerk, name redacted, who died in a fall 2 weeks after the groomer's final known kill. It's tempting to mythologize him, turn him into folklore, the train man, the one who comes for guilt like a toll. But the horror isn't in the myth. It's in the method. No trophies, no frenzy, just surgical calm. One detective said the worst moment wasn't seeing the bodies. It was walking into a victim's kitchen and finding dinner still warm on the stove. 2 plates, 1 set, 1 served, 1 waiting. He'd sat down, he'd waited, maybe even talked. Because when you don't fear being caught, when your motive is deeper than blood, you don't rush. And so he faded, like tracks swallowed by moss. The case went cold, and the city forgot. But in 2021, a maintenance worker in Monroe, Louisiana, found something under an old rail bridge during a routine inspection. A pile of bones. Not buried, arranged. And beside them, carved into a plank of wood, were 5 words. Still dirty, still not done. DNA confirmed the remains belonged to a man named Philip J. Kearns, the last surviving crew member from the 1995 manifest. Case reopened. But the groomer? Gone. Again. Like he never existed. Except, you still lock your doors differently now. You still check your bathroom mirror for words that shouldn't be there. Because some killers leave more than corpses. They leave rituals, and rituals never really end. The groomer left behind more than corpses. He left a blueprint, not of how to kill, but how to disappear, not into shadows, but into purpose. His murders weren't acts of madness, they were closures. Doors slammed shut on forgotten crimes, one dismembered limb at a time. But not all killers want to vanish. Some want the spotlight, the performance, not to be feared, but to be seen. And in a world addicted to outrage, where pain goes viral and cruelty gets claps, one man understood that better than anyone. He didn't leave notes or symbols or riddles. He left reactions, public ones, screams caught on live streams, breakdowns filmed on phones, hashtags built around horror. He weaponized the very thing we thought would protect us: attention. His name wasn't a secret. He made sure of that. His name was Micah Reeve, and he didn't just murder people. He provoked them until they unraveled, on camera, in public, with an audience. Micah's first known victim didn't die in a bedroom or a basement. He died during a podcast. October 2018. A true crime show broadcasting out of Chicago, hosted by a duo known for covering unsolved internet mysteries. 37 minutes into their live recording, a door behind the hosts creaked open, off-screen. One of them looked back, laughed nervously, joked that the studio was haunted. Then he kept talking. But behind him, just barely visible through the reflection of a blacked-out monitor, a figure stood. Still, watching. The audience didn't notice. Not until one of the hosts, Jeremy Kale, went silent mid-sentence, froze, then began to scream. Not words, just a raw, hoarse sound. He clawed at his own face and collapsed. The feed cut. Jeremy was dead before EMTs arrived. Autopsy showed complete laryngeal collapse and asphyxiation. No drugs, no trauma. Nothing the coroner could explain, but in Jeremy's throat they found something wedged so deep it had to be surgically removed, a USB drive. The drive contained a single file, a video, no audio, no timestamp, just 38 seconds of footage showing Jeremy's apartment. The camera was fixed, facing the bedroom. In the corner, behind the curtains, Micah stood, smiling, not moving. A text overlay scrolled across the bottom in white. "You told the story wrong. Now it's mine." Detectives tried to track the source. No IP, no metadata, just a signature, a flicker of static at the end. Shaped like a face. Not drawn, formed. Like the pixels themselves were rearranging into eyes, nose, mouth. The footage went viral. Of course it did. Static face trended for weeks. Horror channels dissected it. Fans debated whether it was real or performance art. But no one asked the real question. How did Micah get in? How did he know? That was always the part that broke people. Micah didn't stalk randoms. He didn't pick from maps. He picked from content. He hunted talkers, people who made noise, built platforms, profited from other people's pain. He chose critics, creators, online commentators. One Twitch streamer, known for reviewing criminal interrogation footage, vanished midstream. The screen went black. Then a text appeared in the chat, typed from his own account. He blinked too slow. His body was found 2 days later in his kitchen, eyes forced open with plastic dental wedges, tongue cut out and melted inside a plastic straw. Micah didn't kill for revenge. He killed for recalibration. That's what one FBI profiler called it. He sees himself as a narrative corrector, the agent said. He believes media attention is currency, and he punishes those who spend it on pain. That theory was confirmed when Micah uploaded his own manifesto, not to the dark web, but to YouTube, 5 minutes long. Title: Your Mouth is a Weapon. The video showed clips of victims laughing, talking, telling stories about trauma that didn't belong to them, overlaid with slow, rising static. At the end, Micah's voice, calm and clean. If you make pain content, you are taking blood from the floor and bottling it. I don't want to be famous. I want you to be silent. Then it cut to black. The video was pulled within hours, but by then it had already been downloaded, mirrored, remixed. Some saw him as a vigilante, some said he was fake. But the deaths continued. A trauma therapist with 1 million TikTok followers found dead with his phone shoved down his throat. A former detective turned podcaster suffocated inside a soundproof booth, his own headphones melted to his ears. No fingerprints, no forced entry, just death, and always. A screen turned on, sometimes a phone, sometimes a laptop, sometimes the TV, always static, always a faint shadow behind it, as if Micah wasn't entering homes. He was exiting the screen. In 2021, authorities linked Micah to an abandoned warehouse in Joliet, Illinois. Inside, they found walls covered in monitors, some playing security footage, others looping static. In the center, a single office chair surrounded by empty frames. But no body, no signs of recent presence, just a note taped to the chair's backrest. I don't need to be real if you believe me. They never found him. Some think he's still alive. Others say he uploaded himself, that he's an algorithm now targeting those who turn tragedy into entertainment. Whatever the truth, one thing remains. Every time a content creator tells someone else's horror story, they check their screen a little longer afterward. They wait for the static, for the shadow, for the silence that sounds wrong. Because Micah Reeve didn't just kill people. He changed the rules. And now every screen, yours, mine, could be a door. The only question is, who's standing on the other side? Micah Reeve didn't live in the shadows. He lived in reflections, in webcams left uncovered, in pause screens, in the half-second before a video buffers. He weaponized the pause, the glitch, the brief moment the human brain stutters between processing and panic. His face was never confirmed. There's no mugshot, no school photo. But almost everyone who survived him described the same moment. Recognition, not of a man they knew, but of something the brain had buried. Something familiar in a way you couldn't explain, like seeing a face from a dream or a shape you remember from behind your eyelids. And that was Micah's real weapon. He made his victims realize they weren't alone long before he ever touched them. The FBI's Cyber Violent Crimes Unit, CVCU, formed a task force just for him. He was their worst-case scenario, a killer who used social engineering instead of brute force, who could enter your home through your likes, your hashtags, your face filters, and then vanish without ever touching a doorknob. They started collecting survivor statements, rare, but they existed. A woman in Sacramento, a man in Tempe, a teenage gamer from Brooklyn. All reported the same pattern: sudden panic while filming, loss of time, then a presence, not a person, a pattern. One woman described hearing her own voice loop back through her headphones but twisted, slowed down to a breath. Another swore her ring light flickered in Morse code. Another walked into her living room to find every screen in the house glowing white, even her phone, which was powered off. What Micah did wasn't hacking, it was hijacking narrative. Every victim had a platform. Every victim used their voice to dissect other people's stories. Crime, trauma, therapy, reaction content, body cam breakdowns. To Micah, these people weren't creators. They were thieves, leeching from the rawness of strangers, then bathing in the applause. And he believed he was the cure, the scalpel to the tumor. "He's not attacking victims," one profiler said. "He's attacking vessels. He sees them as parasites in a closed system. He's the antibiotic, but he's also the virus." The scariest moment in the entire investigation came not from a murder, but a glitch. One CVCU agent, working night shift out of Quantico, opened a case folder linked to Micah's first known victim. The file was normal, a crime scene image, until he zoomed in. In the reflection of the broken mirror on scene, barely visible, distorted, was a figure. But it wasn't Jeremy. It wasn't any responder. The angle was impossible. It was someone behind the wall. The reflection came from inside the drywall, like the mirror had captured something beneath the room. The tech team chalked it up to digital corruption. But the agent, he never came back to work. Resigned, moved to Canada. No statement, no warning. Micah had a habit of returning, not to the scene, but to the audience. After each high-profile death, he would send messages, not to police, but to followers of the victims, comments left in old live streams, glitches embedded in archive thumbnails, words hidden in the waveform of audio tracks. He once wrote an entire message across 400 TikTok accounts by replying with single letters. It read, "The ones who clapped for pain, get it next." The chilling part, he wasn't wrong. Over a dozen followers of his victims were later hospitalized after experiencing extreme hallucinations while recording. One woman described feeling like someone was behind her, all the time, even in sunlight. Another man was found clawing his own eyes out, screaming, "He's inside the edit." There were theories that Micah was an AI experiment gone rogue, that he was a failed NSA black site tool, that he was just a man, born broken, who found a way to digitize his sickness. But no one could explain how he could kill without touching, how he could trigger aneurysms, paralysis, asphyxiation, all without physical trauma. One medical examiner wrote that the bodies looked like they'd been startled to death, like their nervous system quit. It was as if Micah's real weapon wasn't a knife. It was knowing. Knowing when you looked away, when you let your guard down, when your heart skipped just once and never found its rhythm again. In 2022, a darknet data dump leaked 2 terabytes of footage allegedly tied to Micah. Most of it was static, corrupted. But in one clip, just 13 seconds long, investigators heard something clear, a breath, and then a voice. "If you film a horror story, you should be in it." The room in the video was traced to a rental home in Boise, Idaho. The tenant? A 16-year-old crime YouTuber who'd vanished a month prior. His body was found in the crawl space, posed like he was filming, one hand still reaching for the record button. Micah's legacy was digital, but the fear he left behind, that was biological. The sudden dread of being watched through your own camera, the sound of your voice repeating when you didn't press play, the static that flashes when your screen freezes, just long enough for your brain to whisper, "What did I just see?" To this day, the FBI has a hidden protocol known as the Reeve pattern, a checklist for evaluating content-related psychological deaths. If the victim was a streamer, a creator, a commentator, or a podcaster, they now check for digital fingerprints that don't belong to anyone. And when they find them, they don't go public. They just flag the feed and shut it down. Quietly. Before Micah sees it. Because if he does, if he hears his name said too loud, he always comes back. Not in person, but in pixels, in code, in compression artifacts. In the moment your screen flickers and you think it's nothing. Until you remember, nothing is exactly what he uses to kill you. You can turn off a screen, you can close the laptop, unplug the mic, delete the comment that summoned something you didn't understand. But what if there's no signal to cut? No screen to blame? What if the monster doesn't slip through your Wi-Fi, but walks through your front door with a badge, a handshake, and a lie? Not to film you, not to haunt you, but to rehearse you, to make your life a stage, one that ends when your final line is silence. If Micah Reeve was the phantom living in your media, then the next killer, he lived in your town, your neighborhood, your calendar. Because unlike the others, he made appointments. And his victims didn't vanish because they trusted a stranger. They vanished because they trusted protocol. That's what made the visitor so dangerous. He didn't take chances. He took gaps between appointments, between procedures, between names on a clipboard. And when he left, everything looked normal, at least for a while. The first case that stuck was in Vermont, a winter storm, a blizzard technically. February 2020. A 43-year-old woman named Grace Rilling had been scheduled for a post-surgical check-in from a home care nurse. She'd recently had knee reconstruction, couldn't drive, couldn't walk without assistance. Her sister confirmed the appointment. So did the logs. The nurse arrived at 3:45 p.m., left at 4:18 p.m. Neighbors saw nothing. But when Grace's sister came by at 7 o'clock, the door was unlocked. Grace was gone. No sign of struggle, no missing items, just her walker sitting by the couch, untouched. Her phone still charging. And one more thing, an ID badge on the table, hospital issued, clean, laminated, and fake. The badge was traced to no employee. The photo was stock, the logo outdated, but it didn't matter because 5 weeks later it happened again, in Maine. Elderly man, post-op recovery, scheduled nurse check-in. Gone. No forced entry, just a nurse's bag left behind. Packed with real supplies, bandages, saline, gloves, everything but credentials. And inside the side pocket, a tiny notebook with 5 names, 4 crossed out, 1 left. Hollis. Police put surveillance on every address matching that name in 3 counties. They waited. 4 nights later, they saw him. A man in scrubs, early 40s, neutral face, wireframe glasses, driving a white sedan with magnetic logos on the doors. Pulled into the driveway, walked up, knocked, smiled, waited. No mask, just a clipboard. The resident opened the door. The man stepped inside. Police moved in seconds later, but the house was already empty. No man, no victim. Just steam rising from the bathtub and a faint whiff of bleach. They searched the house, top to bottom, nothing. Until one officer opened the linen closet and found a uniform, soaking wet, folded in a perfect square. On the mirror above the sink, one sentence had been written in fingertip condensation. "You said yes." That line became his signature. Over the next year, 9 more disappearances across New England were tied to the same pattern. Always post-surgery patients, always alone, always expecting care, always disappearing without blood, force, or sound. And always the same phrase, left in fog or scratched into soap bars or formed in strands of hair on bathroom floors. You said yes. The implication was chilling. Consent. Not taken. Given. But how? How does a stranger walk into your home, offer you a checkup, and erase you in under 30 minutes? And leave no trace? The truth came from a survivor, a 62-year-old man in upstate New York. He'd been recovering from a fall. was told to expect a home nurse at noon. At exactly 11:59, the man arrived, smiling, calm, same scrubs, same clipboard. The man let him in, sat on the couch. The nurse asked him routine questions, pain level, bowel movements, medication reactions, then asked him to lie down so he could check vitals. The man hesitated, said he'd rather sit. And that's when everything changed. The nurse's face dropped. Just for a second. Not anger. Not frustration. Confusion. Like an actor who'd lost his line. Then, calmly, the nurse stood, said he needed to retrieve something from the car, and walked out the door. The patient called his daughter. The police arrived an hour later. No trace of the car, no prints, but inside the man's blood pressure cuff, tucked beneath the Velcro, they found a tiny earpiece, a receiver. Active, but scrambled. It was enough. Enough to prove that the visitor didn't work alone, that he had someone guiding him, possibly feeding him lines, possibly confirming patient details. But who and why? Theories exploded. Some believed it was a euthanasia cult, cleansing the sick with clinical detachment. Others said it was a rogue branch of home care providers conducting stress tests on system blind spots. But one theory chilled agents to the bone. This wasn't about killing at all. It was about performance. That each visit was an audition. That the killer was rehearsing roles. That he wasn't erasing people because they were weak, but because they were willing. Because when he knocked, they said yes. And in his twisted logic, that meant they didn't deserve a second act. They never caught him, but they found what he left behind in a storage unit rented under a fake name in Connecticut. Inside, uniforms from 9 different hospitals, makeup kits, aging prosthetics, Rolodexes of addresses, medical conditions, emergency contacts, and in the center of the room, a single theater chair, facing a wall covered in mirrors. Beneath it, a script, not handwritten, typed, with stage directions. It was titled, "The Last Appointment." Every line began the same way. He knocks. They answer. They nod. The rest was left blank. The more they studied him, the more they realized the visitor wasn't improvising. He was performing, and like all great actors, he rehearsed in silence long before anyone noticed he was on stage. It wasn't about disguises. It wasn't even about access. It was about belief. Every person who opened their door to him had decided he was real, not because of anything he did, but because of everything they needed. A routine checkup, a human presence, reassurance that someone still cared. That's what made him so effective. He didn't break trust. He assumed it, slipped into it like a warm coat. And by the time anyone felt the chill underneath, it was too late. Investigators combed through every major home care service in the Northeast, looking for anomalies, fake logins, skipped entries, blacked out appointment windows. One anomaly stood out. A scheduling platform used by smaller clinics had been breached in early 2019. Not hacked, observed. A backdoor exploit allowed someone to see the bookings, patient conditions, contact info, but not change anything. Whoever did it didn't want to alter the system. They just wanted to mirror it, build a shadow schedule, their own private list of isolated people waiting to be helped. It was the perfect hunting calendar, and it had been running unnoticed for over 14 months. That explained the access, but it didn't explain the intimacy. Survivors, those who refused the visit, locked the door, or interrupted the appointment early, described details that chilled agents to the marrow. The visitor knew things he shouldn't have. A patient's favorite mug, their pet's name, the pattern of bruising from a fall no one had photographed. One woman claimed he complimented her daughter's piano recital, a performance that had only been posted privately on her Facebook page, visible to family only. Another said he knew the exact number of stairs in her home. She'd never mentioned it to anyone, ever. These weren't details pulled from databases. They were details gathered in person, which meant he had been there before, watching, studying, waiting for the day he could knock and be welcomed inside. In one unsolved case in Massachusetts, a man named Leonard Pace vanished 2 hours after a check-in visit. Nothing left behind except the usual, an IV bag still half drained, and the words, "You said yes," written in dust on the windowsill. But when detectives examined security footage from the street outside, they didn't just find the white sedan leaving. They found it arriving a full week earlier, parked down the block, waiting. The visitor had cased the home days in advance, learned the house, timed the schedule, practiced the walk from curb to door. He didn't kill out of impulse. He killed with rehearsal. The presence of the earpiece, found in the survivor's blood pressure cuff, opened the door to a theory far darker than a lone killer with a god complex. What if this was a program, a pilot, a proof of concept for a new kind of psychological warfare? It wouldn't take much. A man with enough charm to pass for official, a database of vulnerable patients, a script fed through a wireless earpiece. The FBI began searching for patterns of medical supply purchases, scrubs, latex gloves, disposable stethoscopes. They found dozens of minor shipments across state lines. Nothing illegal, but all purchased with prepaid cards, all delivered to P.O. boxes, all within the radius of the disappearances. They couldn't prove it, but they believed someone was funding him, or worse, training him. The storage unit in Connecticut held more than just props. It held rehearsals, audio recordings of practice sessions, the visitors speaking softly, repeating lines. "Let's check that leg. Okay, deep breath. Little sting here." The same phrases, over and over. And in one recording, he breaks character. Lapses. You hear him laugh, then say, almost with pity, "They always sigh when you touch their shoulder." That's the soft spot. That's when they lean in. He didn't sound angry or excited. He sounded fascinated, like a man studying insects under glass. There were dozens of tapes, most labeled with dates and names, none of which matched official records. But one tape stood out. Untitled, 30 minutes long, no dialogue, just ambient noise, wind, footsteps, breathing. And then, at minute 28, a knock, 3 slow taps, a pause. Then a voice, trembling, older, asks, "Are you here for my meds?" A door creaks open, then silence, a silence so heavy that multiple agents reported feeling it, like the air was collapsing. The last sound on the tape is a click, not from a machine, from a tongue, like someone saying "tisk" softly. Then the recording ends. The visitor has not been seen since April 2021, but new cases, new disappearances still match the pattern. One in Albany, one in Rochester, one in a suburb of Hartford, Connecticut, where a handwritten note was found on the kitchen counter, addressed to the nurse. "Sorry, I fell asleep. You can let yourself in." The door was unlocked. The patient? Never found. Investigators believe he doesn't need to force entry anymore. People let him in without checking, without asking. Because in a world of illness, of aging, of slow, quiet loneliness, anyone who knocks with care and clipboard is a friend, especially if they wear gloves. And that's the horror the visitor leaves behind. Not a body, not blood, but doubt. Every knock at the door, every scheduled visit, every stranger in a uniform that looks right. You begin to wonder, is this the help I asked for? Or is this a man rehearsing my final words? The script is still out there, somewhere. The blanks still waiting to be filled. And if your name ever ends up on his list, well, the ending has already been written. You can change your password, you can log out, you can even stop answering the door, but what if the danger was already inside? Not in your home, in your bloodline, because some monsters aren't strangers. They don't need to disguise themselves, force entry, or gain your trust. They already have it. And when they come for you, they don't come with a weapon. They come with a favor. That's what made the next killer different. He didn't hide in darkness. He stood in the open, at the center of every family photo, every holiday dinner, every shared memory, until the people around him began to vanish, one by one. No suspicion, no accusations, just a long series of bad luck that started to look a lot like a curse, until someone finally asked, what if he was the curse? They called him Harlan Bow, but in court documents he was referred to only as Subject HB-14. He grew up in rural Indiana, the oldest of 5 brothers in a family known for misfortune. His mother died in a well accident. His father was killed by a tractor he supposedly repaired. 2 brothers died in fires. Another drowned. By the time Harlan was 28, he was the last one left. At the funeral for the youngest brother, someone whispered it out loud for the first time. He's a magnet for death. It was meant as pity, but it would prove prophetic. Between 2002 and 2019, Harlan Bow buried 11 family members. 11. And for a long time, no one questioned it. Because Harlan was helpful, always the first at the scene. Always the one to call 911, to break down the door, to do CPR, to organize the funeral. He paid for caskets. He comforted widows. He hugged children. He held hands. And when his cousin Kayla died of carbon monoxide poisoning in her garage, Harlan was the one who found her. Said he stopped by to check the brakes on her car. She must have left the engine running, he told police. They believed him. Why wouldn't they? He was family. But the pattern was too strange, too symmetrical. Every death followed a ritual, isolated home, one-on-one visit, a favor Harlan was helping with, an appliance, a repair, a late-night errand, and then death. No break-ins, no evidence, just freak accidents and one very consistent witness. But the moment the pattern began to draw attention, in 2020, when his aunt suffered a slip and hit her head on a marble table after Harlan dropped off groceries, something changed. He got sloppy. The coroner found traces of chloroform on her skin, not enough to sedate, just enough to cause dizziness, disorientation. The toxicologist flagged it. The police took notice. Quietly reopened past files. Then came the discovery. Buried in a rusted cabinet in Harlan's shed, a place he said he used for scrap tools, was a box of items labeled with initials. FB, Frederick Bow. MB, Miriam Bow. DB, Danny Bow. Each package contained something the victim had worn when they died. A belt, a hair clip, a shoelace, all sealed in plastic, dated with the day of death. It wasn't a trophy collection. It was an archive, chillingly neat, meticulously labeled, and hidden under a loose floorboard was a notebook, entries spanning nearly 2 decades. Not confessions, not descriptions, just phrases, 1 per page. He always left the mower out. She never locked the upstairs window. He loved bourbon more than life. Little truths, weaknesses, almost like eulogies written before the death. Prosecutors tried to call it a serial case, but it didn't fit the mold. Harlan didn't kill for thrill, or rage, or revenge. He killed because he felt entitled, like each death was his to decide. That's what the psychological evaluations revealed. Harlan saw himself as a kind of family compass. If someone was weak broken, or slipping, he helped them exit. Not violently, not even personally, just decisively. "It's like removing a bad part from a machine," one profiler said. "He doesn't see murder, he sees maintenance." In court, Harlan said almost nothing. His defense argued circumstantial evidence, claimed the notebook was fictional, claimed the items were keepsakes, not trophies. But when the prosecution showed a video, silent, grainy footage from a neighbor's Ring camera, showing Harlan letting himself into his uncle's house 2 hours before the man was found dead with a broken neck from a staircase fall, the room shifted. You could see it on the jury's faces. This wasn't care. This wasn't grief. This was a ritual, a performance so quiet it bordered on supernatural. Harlan was convicted on 3 counts of second-degree murder. The rest, too old, too soft, too hidden. But the sentence was clear: life without parole. As he was escorted out of the courtroom, a reporter asked why. "Why kill your own blood?" Harlan looked over his shoulder, smiled, and said, "Because I knew they'd never leave me. So I helped them go." He died in prison 6 months later. Stroke, they said. But the guards reported something strange. When they found his body folded neatly in his cot, his hands were gripping a note, written in his own handwriting. 4 words. Another favor finally done. There's something uniquely terrifying about a killer who's also a caretaker, because it forces you to look backwards, to re-examine every hug, every visit, every ride to the doctor's office and wonder, was that kindness or control? That's what Harlan Bow left behind. Not just bodies, not just grief, but a creeping retroactive dread that poisoned entire bloodlines. Survivors began to remember small things, details they'd buried in the haze of mourning. One niece recalled that Harlan always showed up just a little too quickly, as if he already knew. A nephew remembered that Harlan liked to walk the house alone before guests arrived, just checking on things, he'd say. And suddenly, it didn't feel like grief anymore. It felt like choreography. The Bow case tore through Indiana like a windstorm. Reporters called it the family tree murders, and for a while, it became a cultural obsession. Talk shows ran specials, podcasts dissected every death, drawing red yarn through time, trying to link victims by motive. But there was no motive. That was the part that stuck with people. Harlan didn't kill for money, or inheritance, or revenge. He didn't even target one generation. He killed young and old, cousins and siblings, in-laws and blood. He wasn't removing threats. He was pruning people, quietly, deliberately, without rage or remorse. And for that reason, many of his surviving relatives stopped using the word killer. They called him something worse, a gardener. One chilling discovery came from a forensic linguist who studied Harlan's notebook. She found that each entry, though short and casual, carried forensic intent. The phrasing wasn't random. It mimicked police reports, passive, precise, emotionless. "He always left the mower out" might sound simple, but it subtly implies a habit, a vulnerability, a way in. "She never locked the upstairs window" is practically a map. These weren't memories. They were plans. And when authorities tested the pages with luminol, they found faint traces of pressure indentations, as if other words had once been written and torn out. Hidden messages, never recovered. But perhaps the most disturbing revelation came from a storage device recovered from Harlan's computer, a compact USB tucked inside a broken coffee grinder. Encrypted, eventually decrypted. Inside were folders, each labeled with a single initial. C, M, D, L, and so on. Each folder contained recordings, not videos, voicemails, not from victims, from Harlan, left at odd hours, some never sent, practice runs, confessionals, but all following the same pattern: gentle voice, soft tone, subtle manipulation. One message to his cousin Miriam: "Hey, I know the porch light's been acting up. Don't even stress. I'll swing by tomorrow after work, get it squared away. You just rest." Miriam died 2 days later, electrocuted when the porch bulb burst in her hand, shorting a wire Harlan had rewired backwards. He wasn't sloppy. He wasn't theatrical. He didn't want an audience. And that's what made the town unravel. Because how do you explain that level of cold, practiced deception to people who loved him? How do you tell a grieving family they were never safe, not from a monster, but from the person who gave the toast, brought the casserole, helped carry the casket? People began digging. Old photos resurfaced, texts reread. In nearly every death, Harlan was present and dashed, positioned. In one image taken minutes before his uncle's fatal fall, Harlan is seen adjusting a chair behind him, nothing suspicious, until you learn that the back leg had been cut nearly through. Then it looks like sabotage framed as support. The deeper you go, the more you realize Harlan didn't just kill, he conditioned people to rely on him. He volunteered for every errand, picked up prescriptions, helped with taxes. He became indispensable, and then, once the dependence was total, he removed them. No questions asked, no doors forced, no cries for help. The FBI later categorized him as a Type D enabler killer, a new classification created just for him. It describes perpetrators who create artificial dependencies in loved ones to justify removing them from life once they are sufficiently helpless. A crime of engineering, not passion. Even his job reflected this need for quiet control. Harlan worked as a building maintenance technician for a local church. Not a preacher, not a counselor, just the guy who fixed pipes, checked locks, tested smoke alarms. He was trusted with every key, every room, every code. And after his arrest, church staff found that one door, the unused basement boiler room, had been sealed shut from the inside. Welded. No one knew why. When police opened it, they found a single chair facing the wall, a mirror, and a cassette player. The tape was blank, but a sticky note attached to it read, "I practiced here, in case I needed to say goodbye." He never did. Harlan died before sentencing. No final interview, no last words. But he left behind something far worse. A generation of family members afraid to grieve, afraid to remember, afraid that the next time they hear a knock, or see a smile, or accept help, it might not be help at all, because Harlan didn't use fear. He used familiarity. And once you understand that, you never look at comfort the same way again. His story isn't a headline anymore, but the ripples never stopped. His house was burned down by an unknown arsonist, his grave vandalized. Some say the earth rejected him. Others say the community did what the court never could, buried the gardener without roots. But the truth is still hanging in the air like a storm that never broke. If the people who know you best are also the ones who can hurt you deepest, how many more Harlans are out there planting their next goodbye? Some killers vanish into the shadows, some smile into the light. But the most disturbing ones, they don't vanish. They linger. In the photos on your fridge, in the chair at your family table, in the shared stories you now realize were rehearsed. That was Harlan Bowe's legacy, not just murder, but redefinition. He rewrote what closeness meant, made every small kindness suspect, made memory itself unsafe. But if Harlan was a storm that moved in silence, the final name on this list is fire incarnate. Loud, ruthless, not careful, not delicate. He didn't want control. He wanted domination, to destroy, to desecrate, to unravel the very idea of identity. The FBI still calls him the worst kind of predator, not because of his kill count, but because his victims weren't chosen by weakness. They were chosen by resemblance, because this killer wasn't hunting strangers. He was hunting versions of himself. His name, the one he was born with, was Elias Granger, but the world would come to know him as the Mirror Man, because every victim looked like him. Same building, same height, same jawline, similar skin tone, hairline, even tattoos. It started in Phoenix, Arizona in 2014. A man named Devin Mathis was found dead in a motel bathroom. Clean kill, throat slit, wallet untouched. No signs of forced entry. The only clue? His body had been posed, arms crossed over the chest, with a photo tucked under one hand. A grainy, off-center image taken from across the street. It showed Devin walking into the very same motel. But what stopped detectives cold was that the person standing beside him in the photo wasn't Devin. It was Elias Granger. At the time, Elias had no record, no known connection. But weeks later, it happened again and again. Men who looked eerily like Elias began to appear in morgues across the Southwest. Always alone, always in motels, truck stops, side roads, always posed. And always with a photo showing Elias beside them, as if they were friends, traveling together, smiling. Except Elias was not in those places. He had alibis. He was on camera hundreds of miles away. And yet, in each image, he stood, silent beside the victims, like a shadow caught in the wrong life. The FBI was stumped. Were the photos doctored? Was Elias being framed? But when they finally brought him in for questioning in 2015, just as a precaution, they saw something none of them expected. He smiled. Not confusion, not panic. A calculated grin. When asked if he knew the men, he said, "They knew me." When asked to explain, he leaned forward and whispered, "I'm erasing the copies." That phrase would haunt the Bureau for years. Because what unfolded next wasn't just a man murdering lookalikes, it was a purge of resemblance. Over the next 5 years, Elias traveled cross-country, never using his real name, always paying in cash, always staying in rooms under aliases that mirrored the victims. Charles Grainer, Eli Grant, E.G. Parker. He hunted with a camera first, followed men who resembled him from gyms, bars, transit stops. He'd spend days studying them, and when he moved in, he didn't just kill them, he replaced them for a short time. One case in Utah revealed that Elias had lived in a man's apartment for 3 days after the murder, fed his cat, wore his clothes, even called the man's mother, not as a disguise, as an inhabitation, and then, as always, he left the photo, sometimes taken before the kill, sometimes after, but always showing him beside the victim, a blurred twin, a cracked reflection. Psychologists called it identity inversion syndrome, an obsession with reclaiming the self by eradicating duplicates. But Elias's version was weaponized. He once told a prison counselor, "If you look like me, and I don't remember being you, one of us has to go." To him, resemblance was theft. It diluted him. He believed there was only room for one, that every similar face he saw was a form of psychic cannibalism, and killing them was correcting the symmetry. He was caught in 2021 in Oregon. His last known victim had fought back, managed to scratch Elias's face, breaking the pattern of his surgical kills. Blood was found, matched. The man, a gas station attendant named Jay Nestor, had been lured by a job offer, told to meet Eli G. behind the station for cash work. Surveillance caught the tail end of the attack, and for the first time, Elias was identified not from resemblance, but from injury. When he was arrested, He said nothing. For weeks. Sat in the cell and stared at his reflection in a spoon. But on the day of arraignment, he turned to the judge and said, "The mirror broke, so I stopped." Inside his backpack were dozens of photographs, victims, but some were different. They were photos of Elias himself, but altered, burned, torn, eyes scratched out, mouths missing, like he was removing pieces of himself, one face at a time. They believe he had more victims, as many as 27. All across the US, but many were unconnected because their resemblance to Elias wasn't immediately known. The FBI opened a special division to track mirror homicides, crimes in which the killer and victim shared unusual levels of facial symmetry. Elias is serving life without parole. His cell is sealed with a metal plate over the mirror, every reflective surface removed. Even his tray is matte plastic. But guards report that he still finds ways to stare. Puddles, fingernails, the shine of another prisoner's bald head. "He's always looking," one said. "Not around. Address in," like he's waiting to see someone else wearing his face. To this day, his victims' families report nightmares, visions, a presence watching them in crowded places. But perhaps the most haunting detail came from Elias himself in the final words of his psychiatric evaluation before sentencing. When asked if he regretted anything, he replied, "There's still one out there. Still walking, still close. I haven't found him yet, but he's smiling too much. And I think he thinks he's real." 5 killers, 5 distinct horrors, and yet, when you step back, when you widen the lens just far enough to blur the blood, you begin to see something more terrifying than their crimes. You see recognition, a twisted mirror held up to everything we trust. The groomer used revenge as ritual. Reeve turned our thirst for content into execution. The visitor walked through the front door wearing trust like a uniform. Harlan Bow made care indistinguishable from calculation. And Elias Granger, the mirror man, carved his way through a world where his own face became the enemy. Each of them took something sacred, shelter, screens, family, familiarity, identity, and infected it. And now, even though they're caged, vanished, or buried, they remain. Not in flesh, in habit, in fear responses, in muscle memory. They change the way we answer a knock, the way we double-check a reflection, the way we wonder when someone smiles too long, whether that smile was ever real. The groomer left no fingerprints, just a map of guilt paved in steel. His rage was cold, directed, targeted, not at strangers, but at those who killed and thought time would hide it. And for decades, it did. Until the Avenger arrived, not in fury, but in silence. With him came a new question. What if justice isn't legal? What if it's anatomical? That every cut was a message to a world that ignored what happened to a boy buried in metal and oil. And even now, long after the last mirror message was wiped clean, you still look at train tracks differently, don't you? You still check for footsteps in the gravel that never quite fade. Micah Reeve was never caught, but he's seen every day, every time a reaction channel mocks grief, every time a streamer exploits fear for engagement. Micah made one thing clear: if you feast on pain, you better learn to chew quickly because someone's watching. He was a killer designed for the digital age, not behind the screen, but inside it. A predator made of static and suggestion. He didn't use a knife, he used timing. He knew the frame would freeze just long enough, that the reflection would warp just slightly. And now, thousands of people, most of whom never heard his name, still flinch when their webcam light flickers for no reason. That's Micah's gift. Paranoia that updates automatically. The visitor was the quietest, the most normal. a man with a clipboard, clean fingernails, and the perfect voice for asking if you've been drinking enough water. He didn't need to restrain his victims. They let him in. They nodded. They obeyed. And then they vanished. Not because they were weak, but because he was familiar enough. And that's what makes his story so insidious. He showed us that trust isn't given. It's performed. That uniform, tone, posture, all of it can be faked. And now, across the country, elderly patients pause when a nurse smiles. Not because they recognize evil, but because they've realized it doesn't wear a mask. It borrows a name tag. Harlan Bow was a family man. He shook hands, made pies, paid for funerals, and in between he thinned the branches of his bloodline like a man trimming rose bushes. Slowly, neatly, with love, even. There's no monster under Harlan's bed. He was the bed, the chair, the one who tucked you in, the one who already knew your secrets because you gave them to him. That's why his crimes linger in the marrow of survivors, because they weren't betrayed. They were curated, made to feel chosen, special, until they were no longer convenient. Harlan showed us that evil doesn't need to be violent. It just needs to be patient. And even now, in some dusty farmhouse or quiet Midwestern street, someone is making tea for a cousin who knows too much and cares just enough. Because the next Harlan doesn't have to kill tomorrow. He can wait, years, if needed. And Elias? Elias Granger is the kind of fear that survives after death. The fear that you might not be who you think you are. That your face could walk down a hallway and belong to someone else. That you're not being hunted because you're weak or loud or careless, but because you simply exist. He shattered the safety of anonymity, of blending in, and replaced it with the dread that you might be noticed by someone who believes you stole their reflection. There are people out there now, normal people, who avoid mirrors, who flinch at strangers with similar cheekbones, who wonder when they see their own image glitch on a screen if maybe he's still looking. But here's what truly connects them all. These 5 killers didn't just take lives, they took routines. They infected daily motion, showering, streaming, receiving care, hugging family, seeing your own face. They corrupted the background noise of life, the space you used to relax in, and replaced it with low-grade dread. They didn't shatter your world, they tilted it, 1 degree at a time. And that's why their stories stay with you. Not because they shocked you, but because they made sense. On some level, you understand how they got in. And that's the most chilling truth of all. So you lock the door, you double-check the name on the nurse's badge, you keep your webcam covered, you avoid that reflection at midnight. But deep down, you know, all it takes is 1 moment, 1 flicker, 1 knock, and your story becomes part of theirs. Because monsters don't just kill you, the worst ones rehearse you first.